أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام محمد وعلي وصحبه وسلم. Bismillah. Salam everyone. For this week, I decided the topic would be on Islamic ethics. This will be an introduction to the field of Islam and ethics as it permeates into all aspects of our lives. Islam is not just a religion, as we often say, but it's a way of life, a spiritual path to help you have a foundation to how you live a moral, ethical, and good life, where you can attain inner peace and have salvation in this life and in the next, and to save us from self-destruction of our souls, and it gives us purpose in that we're not just an accident in the universe. With morality and ethics, there are two main approaches. On one side, they have the materialistic and subjective morality, point of view, that morality is different from person to person, sometimes drastically different, and there is nothing beyond the empirical. On the other hand, there is the objective morality point of view, that morality has a set standard, so to speak, by a moral authority. Often it's God, who is uncorruptibly and perfectly good. With Islamic ethics, it talks on objective morality, put forth by our Creator God, who, like a loving parent, once was best for us and sends us a book to give us a foundation and for our principles and morals to follow, while using it in cooperation with our intellect. That book is the Quran. The Quran is the word of God to Muslims as God's message to mankind, with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, chosen by God to give us this divine message. As this sermon is mainly an introduction to Islamic ethics, we will start with basic principles and morals. To Christians and Jews, the starting point, their basic principles start from the Ten Commandments. The Quran, though, doesn't have a Ten Commandments per se, but there are founding ethical principles within the Quran. A university professor, S.A. Negocian from the University of Toronto, did point this out, that the Quran does have an equivalent of the Ten Commandments in Surah Al-Isra, the 17th Surah of the Quran. It points out the main principle that every Muslim must strive to follow, as we all strive to be better people. Surah Al-Isra is a Meccan surah, meaning it has a more universal application, going by the Spanish Muslim scholar Al-Shatibi's methodology. The Islamic Ten Commandments takes place in Surah 17, verses 22 to 37. So let's go through them one by one. 1. Worship God alone with no partners. This is in Surah 17, verses 22 and 23. God says, "Do not set up any other deity side by side with God, lest thou find thyself disgraced and forsaken, for thy sustainer has ordained that you shall worship none but him." Now the first commandment is pretty straightforward, that only Almighty God, our Creator, is worthy of worship. But I would also point out this is not just avoiding worship of idols. Like in Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon his time, there are other idols that lurk in our modern world. One big visible one is money. People often put the value of money over human life, as we often have been seeing today, which in itself is idolatry. Another idol, which is apparent in the U.S., is celebrity worship. It's kind of interesting how people obsess over what celebrities are doing, especially if you see in the tabloids and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with admiring a person's talent in something, but don't obsess over it. But as anything else, going too far or too much in anything is bad for us. Number 2, be good to your parents. This is in Surah 17, 23 to 24. God says in it, "And do good unto thy parents. Should one of them or both attain old age in thy care, never say to them or scold them, but always speak unto them with reverent speech, and spread over them humbly the wings of thy tenderness, and say, O Sustainer, bestow thy grace upon them, even as they cherished and reared me when I was a child." This is another key ethic in the Quran, that we be good to our parents since they sacrifice so much for us, especially when we're young. Muhammad Asad comments on this verse saying, "Whereas God is the real and ultimate cause of a man's coming to life, his parents are his or her outward, immediate cause. And so preceding the call to God is followed by the injunction to honor and cherish one's parents." Looking at this verse, just before the verse, it says worship God only, and just after that we are at this verse where it says be good to one's parents, as they care for us when we are most vulnerable when we're young, as we become adults and we take care of our parents when they become vulnerable when they get old. Back in the day, it made practical sense, and even today, many cultures take care of their parents when they get old till they die, and never send them to a nursing home. But But to let you guys know, my dislike for nursing homes is my opinion. What Islam says about nursing homes, I currently don't know, but if any of you have info, please let me know about that. Number 3, be neither stingy nor wasteful in one's wealth. God says in Surah 17, 26-29, and give as due to the near of kin, as well as to the needy and the wayfarer, but do not squander thy substance senselessly. Behold, the squanderers are indeed the ilk of Satans, inasmuch as Satan has indeed proved most ungrateful to his sustainer. And if thou must turn aside from those that are in want, because seek to obtain thy sustainer's grace, hoping for it at least, speak unto them with gentle speech, and neither allow thy hand to remain shackled to the neck, nor stretch it forth to the utmost limit, lest you find yourself blamed by your dependents or even destitute. In these verses, we learn a few ethics that the Quran emphasizes again and again. When it comes to one's money, when you can, first thing you should care for is your family and your kin. And if you still have money, help the poor and the downtrodden. The Quran, like other Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, it emphasizes for helping others and those in need. Indeed, it is a literal pillar of our faith to give to the poor, as Muslims give zakat, which is 2.5% of their wealth. But this is like a bare obligatory minimum. For Muslims who live comfortably to help those in need, of course sadaqah, voluntary charity, is highly encouraged, since acting altruistic is considered very noble in God's eyes, to help your fellow man. As the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that even if you don't have the money to give to charity, even a smile is a charity, and acting nice to others is a charity. And another lesson to learn here is also moderation. The Quran highly emphasizes we give to charity and helping our families and others. It also says not to give away all our wealth that we leave our families and ourselves and our families in poverty. But also say don't be so stingy with your money that money is not even spent on necessities. So the Quran emphasizes the moderate middle path, as it emphasizes moderation in everything in later verses. Number 4, do not engage in mercy killings for fear of starvation. God says in Surah 17, verse 31, hence do not kill your children for fear of poverty. It is we who shall provide sustenance for them as well as you. Verily, killing them is a great sin. This is also a simple and straightforward verse, but it is also from historical context as well as being applied to modern day problems. But this doesn't just relate to killing children for fear of starvation, as Muhammad Assad points out in his commentary. Historically, this may be a reference to the pre-Islamic custom of burying unwanted female children alive, as well as the occasional, though much rarer, sacrifices of male children to some of their gods. Beyond this, however, the above prohibition has a timeless validity inasmuch as it relates to abortions undertaken for fear of poverty on purely economic grounds. It is true that many unfortunate young mothers in the U.S. and Europe who are not prepared for a child may abort their child because they fear for the child's future, which is not fair for the child since he or she had never had a chance to live their potential, but it also emphasizes having children is a huge responsibility and not to be taken lightly, and that only a couple who are committed and are ready to have children to have the best possible future for the child. 5, do not commit adultery. God says 17:32, and do not commit adultery, for behold, it is an abomination and evil way. Again, this verse is pretty straightforward that adultery is a bad thing. Cheating on your spouse that you promise to commit yourself to is considered extremely bad, especially emotionally. The bond between spouses is very deep. Since when spouses make love, their souls become one, and when that happens, it's very hard to emotionally break them apart. Doing adultery is not just having sex with someone you're not married to behind your spouse's back. It is also betrayal, since you're promised to be committed to this person, and that promise is broken. So adultery practically in any ethical and moral system is considered a bad thing. A couple should stay committed in their love for each other and go through thick and thin. Number 6, do not murder an innocent person. And do not take any human being's life, which God says in 17:33, and do not take any human being's life which God has willed to be sacred, otherwise than in the pursuit of justice. Hence, if anyone has been slain wrongfully, we have empowered the defender of his rights. But even so, let him not exceed the bounds of equity in killing. And behold, he is indeed secured by God. Here this verse points out that God has made life sacred, and that killing a person unjustly is one of the worst sins a Muslim, or any person for that matter, can do. And God will lay down the law for a person who has been for a person who was wrongly murdered. As for the murderer, this is one of the few cases where the death penalty can be allowed, but it doesn't have to be, as Muhammad Assad points out in his commentary. Thus, the defender of the victim's rights in this court of justice is not only not entitled to impose a capital sentence on any but the actual murderer or murderers, but may also, if the case warrants it, concede mitigating circumstances and refrain from capital punishment altogether. So unlike what a lot of people talk about Islam promoting death for infidels, all kinds of stupid things like that, God in the Quran has made life sacred both for Muslim and non-Muslim. All human beings have a right to life, and there are few justifications for killing, which I'll talk on later. But in this case, when we talk on murder, which it can be allowed, but a person doesn't have to execute the murder if he wants to impose a lighter punishment. Khalid al-Bafadl in his article points that out about the death penalty, which is a later reference. Number 7, care for the orphans. In Surah 17, verse 34, it says, "And do not touch the substance of an orphan, save to improve it before he comes of age." This requires historical context, as back in the day, the cutthroat society of the pagan Arabia was often the richer getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Sound familiar? And the bottom society of women, slaves, wayfarers, orphans were often forgotten and neglected and lived harsh lives. Many of them end up being slaves in order to pay off debts. And so this verse is putting an emphasis on not touching the property of an orphan before he comes of age, which means puberty, which is considered adulthood at the time, which most societies did the same as well. This verse can also make this extended to caring for all vulnerable members of society. Since pagan Arabia had the mindset of survival of the fittest, the Quran goes against saying that the best of us in character are those who care for those who cannot give anything back, and that the vulnerables in society must be cared for rather than thrown away. There are many places in the Quran where it is pointed out again and again. Number 8, keep promises. Surah 17, verse 34, "And be true to every promise, for verily on Judgment Day you will be called an account for every promise which you have made." This second half of the same verse is also quite straightforward. It's the same verse as the last one. The importance of making a promise, which I have my own regrets. There were times where I broke promises, but everyone makes mistakes. This verse certainly was quite powerful yet short, to show that promising something has a huge significance, and that whatever we make a promise, we must stick to it as much as possible, because on Judgment Day we'll be accountable for the promises that we make or break. Number 9, be honest and fair to others. In Surah 17, verse 35, "And give full measure wherever you measure, and weigh with a balance that is true. This will be for your own good and best in the end." This one is also straightforward, that we must be honest and fair and have integrity when we are interacting with others, since they have the same rights as you do. Obviously, lying and being unfair would be sinful, which to me there's always a chance for us to improve in character, to be honest and fair and just in our dealings with others. When there is honesty, integrity, and fairness, everyone wins and prospers. Most conflict happens when someone feels they are being treated unfairly, and injustice usually comes with dishonesty. May God help us and be honest and fair with our fellow humans. I'll take a break. I ask forgiveness for myself, the community, and the whole world. If I err, it's my responsibility. Not very good with that. Okay, I'll keep going then. So number 9. As I already said, number 9. I say number 10. Do not be arrogant in one's beliefs, and do your research before judging. In Surah 17, verse 36 and 37, God says, "Never concern thyself with anything which you have no knowledge. Verily, hearing and the sight and heart, all of them will be called in account on Judgment Day. And walk not on the earth with haughty self-deceit. For verily, you can never rend the earth asunder, nor can you never grow as tall as the mountains." These two verses point out two ethics in one. Is that the first one points out that don't concern yourself with something that you know nothing about, and do your research first, as Muhammad Assad points out. Another translation for that verse is, "Do not follow or pursue anything that you don't have knowledge." I say this would seem relate to the groundless assertions about the events or people, and hence slander or false testimony, to statements based on guesswork, unsupported by evidence, or interfering in social situations which one is unable to evaluate correctly. End quote. The Quran puts a high emphasis on reason and that we shouldn't follow anything without evidence, and that we should use our intellect to divide what is true and what is not true, and that we shouldn't claim anything without sufficient evidence in almost anything. This verse goes against the blind following of any claim, and that we are to do our research on it before we say anything on it, since because whenever we talk on something, we'll be held accountable for what we say about a certain subject based on whether we make things up or actually did our research. And that when someone claims something, we should evaluate it. The second verse points out that don't be arrogant. Indeed, arrogance is seen in Islamic thought as the root of all evil, since the biggest sin of Iblis was not disbelief. But he knows there's one God, but his greatest sin was that he was arrogant. He felt he was superior to Adam, for example, in other verses, simply because of his inherent qualities. Like he said he was made of fire, and Adam was made of clay. He claimed he was better because of that. But he missed the ball. He said rather someone is only better than another by character, which is the reality of how a person can be better, not by class, race, or social standing. Alright, well, for my introduction to Islamic ethics, I give credit to the scholar and commentator Muhammad Assad and Professor S.A. Negocian for making an outline and pointing out the equivalent of the Islamic Ten Commandments, which their contributions helped me organize giving this introduction to ethics in Islam. These 10 main principles, which are summed up in just a few verses in the Quran, are straightforward and simple, but often can be difficult to follow, as many of us, of course, make mistakes, and I make mistakes, you make mistakes, everyone makes mistakes. It's mainly because simply we're human, and we make mistakes, we learn from our mistakes, and we put it behind us, and we grow in character. You cannot grow if you never make a mistake, so it's a part of life. And also, as we grow, we increase in wisdom, which comes from God, which my mother always said, wisdom always comes from God. I will close saying that I hope this is a helpful talk, and that if I made an error, the responsibility is mine, and I'd love to hear your feedback.